Donald Trump's first day in office is exactly 2 weeks away. So will he actually do what he's been telling journalists he plans on doing? And if he does pardon the violent January 6th rioters, and you heard him say that he would do that, what exactly is it going to cost him? Joining us now, host of Radio Atlantic and co-host of the Atlantic's narrative podcast, We Live Here Now, that explored the leaders of the Justice for January 6th movement, Hanna Rosin. Really good to have you.
Thank you.
This is it's a big topic. Who Donald Trump is going to pardon, how far he's going to go with it. He's said everything. He plans on pardoning all of them. He's also said he's going to take it on a case-by-case basis. We're not going to know until he does it. I guess what is at stake here for him? I know there's different stakes. We'll get to those in a moment. But what do you think is at stake for him politically if he decides to pardon the violent people?
It's trickier than it seems. The first thing to note is the majority of Americans have said that they're against the pardons. And so it's not as easy as it looks. He's made some promises to what's now coalesced as the January 6th community. That is the family and friends of people who have either pled guilty or been charged with crimes related to January 6th. He's been clear to them, but not all Americans agree with him. So it's a little complicated what it means for him politically.
Some of these folks that he has talked about pardoning, the violent ones, had violent records before what happened on January 6th. I mean, they're not exactly people who walked in there with clean hands. They also all went through trials and were either pleaded guilty or were convicted by a jury of their peers. Do you expect to see any discomfort among Republican lawmakers if he decides to go far with this, if he decides to let off the hook folks who got into it with police officers, who were pushing against the barriers, who were maybe carrying handcuffs or spraying pepper spray? Again, the violent ones. Do you think any Republican lawmakers are going to stand up and say, maybe this is going a little too far?
It depends how you define the violent ones. You just listed a whole bunch of things which are very different. So the definition of assault, which a lot of people have been convicted of, ranges from, actively hitting a police officer with a flagpole and being caught on film doing that, pushing a barrier, so it just depends. It depends what the video shows. It depends what you've actually done. Now, note that the majority of people who have been both convicted and who pled guilty have been charged with misdemeanors. So would you consider those violent? Would you consider shoving a barrier against a police officer violent? Some are very clear, but the majority are not very clear. So I think there's a lot of ways that Trump could spin this. People tend to believe him, and he could get up there and say, oh, this person just, what was their weapon? They picked up a flag. Is that a weapon? So it sort of depends on how he spins this. There are some who are very clearly violent and caught on film being violent. I doubt it would be very hard to get away with pardoning those people, but they're a minority of the people convicted.
The We Live Here Now podcast is fascinating, Hanna, and you really were able to go into the mind of some of the January 6th rioters, but also some of the family members associated with them and the way that they've been holding vigils and the way their lives have changed. I wonder if you could bring us into the heads of even one person, of what it means for them now that Donald Trump won, and what their lives might look like now, what sort of community member they might be.
Yeah, I think their expectation is that their lives will go back to normal, that their family members will come home, and that everything will go back to the way it was. Now, I think the thing no one's talking about is a pardon doesn't say you weren't guilty. A pardon, the Supreme Court has ruled, is a kind of intimation of guilt. So I'm not sure how that then continues forward into the rest of your life. Are you still considered a felon? Are you still considered a January 6th? Or is it still hard for you to get a job the way it has been for a lot of people who have pled guilty? I mean, generally, the way that presidents have used pardons is kind of as a large act of mercy, not as an idea that you didn't do what you were accused of doing, which is what President Trump is intimating. So I'm not sure how the rest of society will accept the January 6ers, even though their expectation is, look, this shows that we're innocent. This shows we never did anything wrong. We were just participating in a day of love and peace, which is what Trump has called it. We are not criminals. That's not actually what a pardon says about you. So
Yeah.
We'll see how it unfolds in their lives. compared to what they expect.
Yeah. What about the radicalization? You document the way people went into prison and the way they came out and the way in which they were held together. Usually when you go into prison, we've had this discussion, you're not amongst people who you committed crimes with. You're separated out. But with the January 6 rioters, because they were in a D.C. prison, because their crimes were different or potentially dangerous, it was potentially dangerous to have them part of the general population. They were all packed in together, and in that group, they radicalized each other. How might that look on the outside if Donald Trump chooses to pardon the ones that got harder in prison?
Yeah, I mean, the Justice Department did many things right in this investigation. It's the largest investigation in history, but putting them all together really gelled them as a community. You know, it created the January Sixers as a community with unified interests, unified purpose, and they have been radicalized and they have all this energy against what they call the deep state. So I'm not really sure what happens to all that energy if they're pardoned. Does it just fizzle, or do we continue to live with the January Sixers as a community who are politically legitimate? It becomes just one of those things that are normalized under Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I wonder how the FBI going forward might see these folks. I mean, the FBI, which worked hard to gather them up and to prosecute them and to investigate them, the FBI, how it might behave or what the goals might be under Donald Trump's administration and potentially a Kash Patel at the head of it.
Yeah, there's been conspicuous silence, I would say, from the unions, you know, both the police unions and in general, like the organizations that support law enforcement about these pardons. A lot of reporters have reached out to them and they have declined to comment. I think it's really tricky because on the anniversary of January 6th, you will hear and are going to continue to hear from police officers who were badly injured. There have been a few police officers who took their own lives. I mean, police officers really suffered and their lives were also destroyed and their families were also destroyed as a result of January 6th. So I really do think there'll be pushback if Donald Trump just ignores the fact that police were the victims in this case, as we can see on screen right now.
Yeah, lots of roads to follow in the coming months. Hanna Rosin, thank you very much. Appreciate it.